Raymond Acheampong was 41 years old when the man sleeping with his wife walked into the wrong conference room and destroyed the wrong man's life. For 9 years, Raymond had been a husband and a builder. Not a builder in the metaphorical sense that gets used at funerals and retirement dinners. A builder in the specific, physical, documented sense. A civil engineer who had taken a 2-room consulting practice in a rented office on the west side of Charlotte and built it. Over 7 years of 70-hour weeks and cold call proposals and driving to job sites before the crew arrived. Into a 15-person infrastructure firm with $4.2 million in annual contracts and a reputation in 3 states for being the team you called when the other team had already failed. He drove a 2015 Chevy Tahoe with a cracked back bumper from a parking structure incident 2 years ago that he'd never gotten around to fixing. He kept a yellow legal pad in the center console. He wore the same brand of work boots he had worn since his 2nd year in the field, because they were the boots that worked, and there was no reason to change something that worked. His wife, Claudette, had been planning her exit for 8 months. Raymond understood this later. Later, when the timeline became legible, when the dates aligned and the receipts surfaced, and the man's name had a shape in his mouth, he could finally say, without his hands going still. She had been planning her exit while Raymond was closing the Mecklenburg County drainage contract, the largest single contract his firm had ever signed. She had been planning it while he worked late and came home and warmed plates and said all the right things and did not notice, could not have noticed, did not know what to look for. That the woman sitting across the table from him at dinner had already decided he was the past. What she did not know, what she had never once thought to ask about in 9 years, was that the investors Raymond was presenting to that morning controlled $340 million in regional infrastructure capital, and that the presentation she had just tried to destroy was the thing that would fund the next 7 years of Raymond Acheampong's life. She had been counting on his silence. She had been counting on his smallness. She had miscounted on both. What happened after that Tuesday morning would cost Claudette every plan she had made and give Raymond back something she never understood she had taken. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 4:53 a.m. Raymond was already at his desk. He had been at his desk since 4:20, with a cup of black coffee going cold at his elbow and the investor presentation open on 2 monitors, going through it slide by slide the way he went through structural plans, not looking for what was right, but looking for what could go wrong. The presentation was 41 slides. He had built it over 6 weeks. It covered the firm's 8-year project history, current contract portfolio, 3-year growth projections, and a capital deployment plan for a $12 million investment that would allow the firm to expand into municipal water infrastructure work in 2 additional states. He had practiced it 7 times. He could deliver it without the slides. He delivered it without the slides anyway. Standing in the dark office with his coffee, speaking to the wall, listening to his own voice for anything that sounded unsure. He found 2 transitions that moved too fast. He fixed them before 5:30. The firm's office was on the 4th floor of a building in South End. Raymond had leased the space 4 years ago when the team grew to 10 people, and the original office on the west side stopped being sufficient. He had painted the conference room himself the first weekend, a deep gray-green that read, "Professional without reading corporate," that said something specific about the people who worked inside it without naming what it said. He had built the shelving along the north wall from plans he drew himself, and the shelves held binders and project photos and 3 industry awards in plain black frames that he had put up without ceremony on a Tuesday afternoon and not mentioned to anyone. He arrived at the office at 6:15. The building was empty at that hour, the overnight cleaning staff's work visible in the vacuumed carpet and the emptied trash cans, and the particular stillness of a space full of people's things with none of the people in it yet. He liked this hour. It was his hour. He made a second cup of coffee in the break room. The coffee maker he had chosen, the appliances he had bought, because when you own the space, you own all of it, including the break room, including the small decisions that don't seem to matter until you realize they add up to a culture. He carried the cup to the conference room and checked the setup. Projector, laptop connection, document folders at each of the 5 seats. He had printed and collated the folders himself the previous evening, the firm overview, the 8-year project summary, the current contract portfolio, the financial statements for the last 3 fiscal years, the 3-year growth projections, and the reference letters from 2 municipal clients who had written without being asked because the work had warranted it. He had collated each folder in the correct order, turned the pages the same direction, placed them precisely. He straightened one stack that was off by a centimeter. He stood at the head of the conference table and looked at the room. The gray-green walls he had painted himself. The project photos in plain black frames along the north wall. The shelving he had built from plans he had drawn himself, holding binders and project records going back to year 1. The Charlotte skyline through the south window in the soft gray of early morning. He had built this. Every element of this room was the product of a specific decision, made carefully by someone who understood load and tolerance and what a structure needed to carry the weight it was going to carry. The investors arriving in 4 hours were the next step in a plan he had been executing for 12 months. He was ready. His office manager, Priya, arrived at 7:30 and looked at the conference room and said, "You've been here since before I got here." "Since 6. She looked at him in the way she had developed over 4 years of working together, not prying, registering. "The parking garage is flagged," she said. "Meridian is 3, Ashford is 2. "Thank you. Is Kofi in yet?" "Not yet. 8 o'clock. "Tell him I want to walk the technical appendix at 8:15. "Done." She looked at him once more. "Coffee?" "I'm on my 3rd. She went to her desk. He sat in his office and looked at the legal pad. He had been building toward this presentation for a year. Not just the 6 weeks of slides and financial projections, the whole year. The contracts he had chosen to pursue specifically because they demonstrated the firm's capacity in the sectors these investors cared about. The hire he had made 8 months ago. A drainage system specialist named Kofi, who had 15 years of municipal water experience, and whose presence on the team had already changed the nature of what Raymond could credibly bid on. The Meridian Capital Group was not the first set of investors Raymond had approached. There had been 2 prior meetings in the firm's 4th and 6th years, both of which had produced useful feedback and no capital, and from which Raymond had drawn precise conclusions about what the firm needed to look like before it was ready for this conversation. He had built toward readiness the same way he built toward anything. Methodically, without announcing it, one specific decision at a time. That was how he had always operated. Not dramatically, not loudly. He thought ahead and built accordingly, and did not announce what he was building until it was built. Because announcing a thing before it is complete is a different kind of structural failure. It puts load on a frame that hasn't set yet. He had applied this principle to the firm. He had applied it less consciously, but just as completely, to everything else in his life. He reviewed his notes one more time, capped the pen, and put the legal pad in the center drawer. He went home at 8:30 to change into his presentation clothes. A charcoal suit he had owned for 3 years, kept pressed, worn for meetings that required something beyond the firm's standard business casual. He kept it in a dry cleaning bag in the back of the closet. He had worn it to the Mecklenburg County contract signing and to 2 other meetings he considered significant. It had not lost once. Claudette was in the kitchen when he came in. She was on her phone, leaning against the counter, and she looked up when he came through the door, and there was a moment, a fraction of a second, the speed of a structural load shifting, of something in her face that was not the expression of a wife watching her husband come home to change for an important meeting. It was the expression of a woman who had expected to have more time before this particular moment arrived. He did not read it as that. He read it as distraction, as the preoccupation of someone in the middle of a message. He had been reading her that way for months. He had been interpreting her late evenings as professional demands, her silences as stress she would share when she was ready, her physical distance as the ordinary friction of two people whose schedules had grown demanding in the same season. He had been patient. He had been understanding. He had told himself, more than once, that they had built 11 years of a marriage that could absorb a difficult season, and that patience was the appropriate response to difficulty. He had told himself many things that were not wrong in principle, and had been wrong in application. The kitchen smelled of coffee she had made for herself, and a candle on the counter. A new candle, one of several new things in the house over the preceding months that had appeared without explanation, and that Raymond had noted and not commented on. A new set of wine glasses in the cabinet, finer than what they had owned before. A different brand of hand soap. Small adjustments to the surfaces of the life, imperceptible individually, that added up to something he could not yet name. "Big day," he said. She didn't look up from the phone. He went upstairs. He changed into the suit. He tied the tie in the bathroom mirror, a straight, even knot, the way he tied it every time, and looked at himself for a moment. He looked like a man who had built something real and was ready to show it to people who could see it clearly. He came back downstairs. Claudette had put the phone face down on the counter in a motion he could not have described but would remember with precision later, when he was sitting in a hotel room going through 9 years of financial records and understanding what the motion had meant. "I'll be late tonight," he said. "The meeting runs until 2. Kofi and I are taking them to lunch after." "Okay," she said. He went to the door. He paused. "You all right?" She looked at him. Her eyes were clear and composed and gave him nothing. "Fine," she said. "Good luck today." He nodded. He left. He almost registered it. The particular register of those 2 words, "good luck," said by someone who knows more than they are saying. It passed through him like a frequency below the threshold of conscious notice and was gone by the time he reached the Tahoe. He almost missed it. The way she had said "good luck," 2 words in the specific register of a person who knows something the other person does not, and who is in the process of doing something they have decided to be at peace with. He almost registered it. It passed through him like a vibration below the threshold of conscious notice, and he was in the Tahoe with the legal pad on the passenger seat before it faded entirely. He arrived back at the office at 9:45. The Meridian Capital team was arriving at 10. He stood in the conference room for 3 minutes alone, looking at the table, the folders, the projector screen, the view of the South End through the windows. And he thought about the 7 years that had produced this room and this morning. He thought about the first contract, a drainage assessment for a strip mall in Kannapolis, $3,000. Work he had done in 14 days while holding down a salaried position at another firm. He thought about the second contract and the third. He thought about the morning he had signed the lease on this office, standing in an empty room with the smell of fresh paint and a lease document in his hand, and thinking, "This is real now. This is actual." He thought about Kofi, who was at that moment reviewing the technical appendix slides in his own office down the hall. He thought about Priya and the 7 other people in this office who had built their professional lives around the work this firm did and would continue to do. He was ready. The Meridian Capital team arrived at 10:03, 2 partners and a managing director, all 3 in dark suits, carrying leather portfolio bags. The Ashford partners arrived at 10:09, a father and son operation from Raleigh who had been watching Raymond's firm for 2 years before agreeing to this meeting. Raymond met them both at the door, shook every hand by name, walked them to the conference room, made sure everyone had water and coffee. He stood at the front of the room. He looked at the 5 people at the table. He opened the presentation with the firm's origin, not the sanitized, glossy version that goes in marketing materials, but the real one. A 2-room office, 1 employee, a used engineering license, and a single contract that he worked on during the evenings for 8 months before the firm could support him full-time. He told it plainly, because it was true, and because the truth of how something was built tells you more about its structural integrity than any projection slide. He was on slide 14, the contract portfolio breakdown, the largest slide, the one that made the numbers legible in a single image. When the conference room door opened, he did not stop speaking. He looked at the door the way he looked at anything that came into his field of attention while he was working, noting it, calibrating it, continuing. It was a man he did not recognize. Tall, well-dressed in a way that was specific and deliberate. The suit was expensive, the watch was visible, the haircut was recent. He was perhaps 38. He stood in the doorway with the particular posture of a man who has arrived at a place expecting to find one thing and has found another. Raymond finished his sentence. He turned fully to face the door. "I think you may have the wrong room," he said. The man looked at him. Something passed through his face, a recalibration, quick and almost invisible, and then a decision. "A Kampong?" he said. Raymond was still. "Yes." The man looked at the investors at the table. He looked back at Raymond. And then he did the thing that Raymond would spend the next several months understanding as the most expensive mistake the man ever made. "The investors you're meeting with," the man said, clearly enough for everyone in the room to hear, "are going to want to know that your firm is under new management. Claudette and I are taking the client list elsewhere. I'd suggest you tell them that before they write any checks." He did not wait for a response. He turned and walked back through the door he had come through. His footsteps receded down the hall. The conference room was quiet. Raymond looked at the 5 people at the table. The managing director from Meridian Capital had set down his pen. One of the Ashford partners had his hand flat on the table, the way people put their hands flat on things when they need something to hold on to. Everyone was looking at Raymond. He looked at the projector screen. Slide 14, the contract portfolio, the $4.2 million in annual revenues, the 3-state footprint, the 8-year track record. He looked back at the table. "I apologize for the interruption," he said. His voice was the same as it had been on slide 1. "That is not something I was expecting, and I want to be transparent with you about what just happened." A pause. Not a long one. "My wife and I are in the process of separating. The man who just walked in appears to be involved with her. I was not aware he had any intention of involving himself in this meeting." He looked at each person at the table in turn. The client list he referenced is the firm's client list. It belongs to the firm. The relationships on it were built by this team over 8 years. They are not portable. He paused again. "I'd like to continue the presentation, if you're willing." The managing director from Meridian Capital looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. "Continue," he said. Raymond continued. He called his brother Kwame from the parking structure at 2:47 that afternoon, after the investors had left and Kofi had gone back to the office and Raymond had sat in the Tahoe in the parking structure for 9 minutes with the engine off. Kwame answered on the first ring. "How'd it go?" "The presentation went well," Raymond said. Something else happened. He told Kwame, in sequence. The door opening, the man's face, the words, the quiet in the conference room. Kwame listened without interrupting, which was not his natural mode. Kwame was a man who processed things aloud, who punctuated other people's stories with his reactions. The fact that he did not say a word until Raymond finished was its own information. "What's his name?" Kwame said. "I don't know yet." "What are you going to do?" Raymond looked at the concrete ceiling of the parking structure. A long water stain on the 3rd level. Structural crack in the expansion joint above the north wall. His eyes found these things automatically. "I'm going to find out what I'm dealing with before I do anything." "Raymond, I know. That's not a situation where you wait and think." "It's exactly that situation." His voice was level. "Whatever I do next has to be done right. Completely." Kwame breathed. "You need a lawyer." "I know what I need." He sat in the car for another minute. Then he started the engine. He drove back to the office. He went to his desk, opened his laptop, and searched. Best divorce attorney, Charlotte Business Assets. He wrote 3 names on his legal pad. He put a check next to the first name. Simone Okafor, partners in family law. 2 decades of experience in high-asset dissolution, listed as one of Charlotte's top 10 attorneys in the field by 3 separate publications. He wrote her office address and phone number. He looked at it for a moment. He did not go home that night. He drove to a hotel near the airport, a clean, functional place with a working desk and a quiet room, and he booked a room for 3 nights. He packed nothing from the house. He had an emergency kit in the Tahoe that he'd put together years ago for job sites, a change of clothes, toiletries, a charger. He used that. He sat at the hotel desk and opened his laptop and began to work. He went through 9 years of joint financial records with the same systematic attention he brought to a structural audit. He was looking for drift, the small cumulative misalignments that are invisible in isolation and catastrophic in aggregate. He found the first anomaly in month 7 of his search. A transfer of $3,400 from the joint savings account to an account he did not recognize, on a Thursday in March of the previous year. He found 9 more transfers over the following 8 months. The amounts ranged from $2,800 to $6,100. The timing was irregular enough to avoid a pattern, but consistent enough, once he knew what he was looking at, to be unmistakably deliberate. Total, $47,200. Transferred out of the life they had built together in increments designed to stay below the threshold of his attention. He had not been paying attention to the account. He had been paying attention to the contracts, the projections, the investor presentation. He had been building forward while someone quietly moved things out through a door he hadn't known was open. He took screenshots of every transaction. He emailed them to himself. He opened a new document and titled it with the date and began to write what he knew. He wrote for 2 hours. Then he closed the laptop and looked at the wall of the hotel room and sat with the information for a while, not processing it emotionally, not moving it around, just letting it be what it was. A structure with load in it. A problem that had a shape. A problem he was going to solve. He called Simone Okafor's office the next morning at 8:03 a.m. and made an appointment for Thursday. He went to the office on Wednesday. He said nothing to anyone about what had happened. Priya, who knew things without being told, looked at him once when he arrived and then did not ask. He worked through his normal morning, 3 site calls, a materials review, a meeting with Kofi about the upcoming bid cycle. He worked with the same focus he always brought to work, which was total and deliberate and required no performance, because it had never been a performance. At 11:15, his phone rang. Claudette. He looked at the phone. He let it ring. He forwarded the call log to the email folder he had created for documentation and went back to the bid cycle meeting. She called twice more before noon. He did not answer. He texted her attorney's name and number to Kwame at 12:30 with the message, "Don't engage her directly." Kwame replied, "Understood." He had not yet retained an attorney. He did not have her attorney's name yet. He sent the text as a statement of principle, a reminder to himself as much as to his brother. This goes through the right channels, or it doesn't go at all. On Thursday morning, he drove to Simone Okafor's office in a building on East Moorhead Street. A third-floor suite with a small lobby, 2 paralegals, and a wall of case books behind her desk that looked like they had been used, not staged. Simone Okafor was 53, with the precise, unhurried manner of someone who has heard everything and is no longer surprised by any of it. She shook his hand and told him to sit and said, "Tell me what you know." He told her. He produced the printed financial records with the highlighted transfers. He described the investor meeting. He described the man in the doorway and what he had said. He described the conference room and the 5 people at the table and his own voice continuing to give the presentation as if the floor had not just shifted. Simone Okafor listened without moving. When he finished, she set her reading glasses on the desk. "The firm," she said. "Walk me through the ownership structure." He walked her through it. The firm was an LLC, established 7 years ago, with Raymond as the sole managing member. No joint ownership, no marital interest, no co-signing. Claudette had never been added to the LLC because Raymond had established it before the marriage and had never had a reason to change the structure. The firm's accounts were business accounts, separate from their personal joint account. The only marital financial instrument was the joint checking and savings accounts, which the $47,200 had been moved out of. Simone Okafor looked at him for a moment. "She has no claim on the firm itself?" "That was my understanding." "That's correct." She picked up her pen. "The $47,200 is a different matter. We'll want forensic documentation of where those funds went." She wrote something. "The man at your investor meeting, do you have his name?" "Not yet." "Get it, even a first name. We can work from there." She wrote again. "The investors, were any of them affected by what he said?" Raymond looked at her. The meeting continued. "We received a preliminary letter of intent from Meridian Capital on Friday morning. $11 million, contingent on standard due diligence." Simone Okafor's pen stopped moving for a moment. Then she continued writing. "He walked into the wrong room," she said. "He walked into the wrong room," Raymond said. She looked up. "I need you to document everything from the day you discovered the anomalous transfers. Dates, amounts, your process. I'll file for emergency asset protection on the joint accounts by the end of the week. We're going to need a forensic accountant. I have someone I use. He's very thorough. And I need you to say nothing to Claudette directly. Nothing. Let her attorney reach out." "Understood." "One more thing." She looked at him directly. "The man at the meeting said she's taking the client list elsewhere. Do you know what that means?" "I know what he intended it to mean," Raymond said. He thought the firm's client relationships belonged to Claudette, or to him, or to some version of their plan that didn't account for the actual structure of the business. He paused. The client relationships were built by this team. They're documented in contracts that name the firm as the service provider. They are not transferable. Simone Okafor nodded slowly. Did he know that? I don't think he knew much, Raymond said, about me or anything related to me. She almost smiled. No, she said, he clearly did not. His name was Derek Paulson. Kwame found it in 3 hours using the LinkedIn profile of the woman at Claudette's marketing firm, who had been the closest thing to a mutual friend. Derek Paulson was a commercial real estate developer based in Charlotte, mid-level, with a portfolio of 4 mid-range commercial properties and a professional biography that described him as a visionary in regional development. Raymond looked at his LinkedIn profile for a long time. He looked at the portfolio. He looked at the properties. One of them was a development site on the east side of Charlotte. A mixed-use project, the bio said, currently in the environmental impact and permitting phase. Raymond looked at that line for a while. He knew that site. He had been past it 12 times in the last 2 years on the way to a municipal drainage contract in the same corridor. He knew the soil composition in that zone, difficult, variable, with a clay layer at depth that created drainage problems specific enough to require exactly the kind of specialist work his firm did. He had seen the development signs go up. He had noted, professionally and without further action, that whoever eventually built on that site was going to have a complicated time with the drainage and foundation requirements. He did not do anything with this information. He noted it. He filed it. He moved on. There was something clarifying about this piece of the picture. Derek Paulson had walked into Raymond's conference room with a plan he had not built correctly, in front of investors he had not correctly assessed, to deliver a blow to a man he had not correctly understood. And now, Derek Paulson had a development site with a soil problem that required exactly the kind of specialist engineering work that Raymond's firm existed to do. He had walked into Raymond's room, and now he was standing on Raymond's ground, literally, without knowing it. Raymond did not call him. He would never call him. It was enough to know where the load was bearing. The rest was a matter of time and patience, and the specific confidence of a man who understands how structures fail. The forensic accountant Simone used was a compact, methodical man named Arthur Fell, who arrived at Raymond's hotel room on a Friday morning with a laptop and a portable hard drive, and spent 4 hours going through the 9 years of financial records Raymond had assembled. He found the $47,200. He found something else. 2 wire transfers in the weeks before the investor presentation, totaling $14,800 from the joint savings to an account that resolved to a newly formed LLC with a Mecklenburg County filing date of 6 weeks prior. He found that the LLC had 1 registered member, Derek Paulson. Raymond sat with that for a moment after Arthur Fell left. $62,000, moved out of their life in careful, invisible increments. And then at the end, in the final weeks, when the plan was presumably in its execution phase, transferred directly into the business account of the man she was leaving him for. Not savings, not a personal account, a business account, which meant the money had a purpose in that business. He called Simone that evening. "How certain is the documentation?" she said. "Arthur gave me a complete chain, transaction records, account resolution, LLC filing. The LLC's principal address is a building Derek Paulson owns on Providence Road." A pause. "That's not divorce fraud," Simone said. "That's potentially a civil RICO matter." Raymond was quiet. "I'm going to refer this to a colleague who handles financial fraud in civil matters," she said. "This doesn't change the divorce strategy. It adds a layer." Another pause. "Raymond, I have to ask, did you have any awareness this was happening?" "None." Good. Then I want you to stop looking at the records tonight and let Arthur and my colleague build the picture. The more you look at it independently, the more complicated the evidentiary chain becomes. He looked at the hotel room wall. Understood. You've given me enough to work with. Let the system do the rest. He closed his laptop. He sat in the quiet room with the hum of the air conditioning and the muted sound of the highway outside. And he breathed slowly and evenly, and thought about the column spacing error on the Mecklenburg site, the 2-inch drift that had propagated invisibly through 3 drafts before he caught it, the way invisible errors always want to become visible eventually, the way they always do. He thought about Derek Paulson's development site on the east side, the clay layer at depth, the drainage problem specific enough to require specialist work. He almost felt something like clarity. Claudette retained a divorce attorney named Marcus Haverford, who called Simone's office on a Monday morning with the energy of a man who had not yet seen the full picture of what he was walking into. He proposed a clean dissolution, equal split of marital assets, no civil claims. He used the phrase straightforward circumstances twice in the first conversation. Simone thanked him for the call and told him she would be in touch. The following week, Simone filed 3 documents: the divorce petition, an emergency injunction freezing the joint accounts, which contained, at that point, approximately $2,400 remaining after the withdrawals, pending resolution, and a civil complaint for fraudulent transfer and conversion of marital assets, naming Claudette and Derek Paulson jointly in connection with the $62,000. Marcus Haverford called Simone back within 24 hours. His tone was different. Simone was not available to take the call. Her paralegal took a message. While the legal process moved, Raymond worked. He moved out of the hotel after 10 days and into a furnished apartment in Plaza Midwood, a 2-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor of a quiet building with good light and a parking space that fit the Tahoe. He set up a work area at the dining table the first night. He unpacked his yellow legal pads and his mechanical pencils and his reference binders for 3 active projects. He made coffee in the kitchen the same way he had always made it, and he drank it standing up, looking out the window at the street below. And then he sat down and went to work. The Meridian Capital due diligence process proceeded. Raymond provided everything they asked for: project histories, financial statements, client references, insurance documentation, LLC operating agreements. He answered every question in writing, precisely and completely, within 24 hours of receiving it. The managing director told him in a call 3 weeks into the process that Raymond's documentation was the cleanest they had reviewed in a current portfolio cycle. Raymond thanked him and asked about the next step. He had been telling the truth in that conference room on slide 14, when he talked about what the firm could do with $12 million. He had been telling the truth about every slide. He was always telling the truth in that room. That was the thing Derek Paulson had walked into and had not understood. Derek Paulson, in the weeks following the conference room incident, discovered that walking into a room and making a claim is different from the claim being true. He had called 2 of Raymond's municipal clients directly. Both calls were brief. Both clients called Raymond's office afterward to report the contact. Raymond documented the calls. Simone added them to the civil complaint as evidence of tortious interference with business relationships. Derek's development project on the east side entered its permitting phase and encountered, with the specific difficulty Raymond had anticipated, the drainage and foundation engineering requirements that the site's soil composition demanded. His first engineering firm produced a foundation plan that the city's permitting office rejected on drainage grounds. His second firm produced a revised plan that the office returned with questions. The project timeline slipped. His financing arrangement, which had been structured around a specific completion date, began to show stress. Raymond was aware of this because it was public record and because he drove past the site twice a week on the way to the Mecklenburg project. He did not call Derek Paulson. He did not contact anyone associated with the project. He noted the situation. He filed it. He moved on. The settlement meeting was set for a Tuesday at 9 a.m. in Simone Okafor's conference room. A clean, spare room on the third floor with a rectangular table and 6 chairs and a window that faced east. Raymond arrived at 8:40. He wore the charcoal suit. He carried the leather portfolio. He sat in the chair Simone indicated and set the portfolio on the table and waited. Claudette and Marcus Haverford arrived at 9:04. Raymond had not seen Claudette since the morning of the presentation. She was dressed carefully, and she walked in carefully, and she sat across from him without looking at him directly. She looked as if she had spent the preceding weeks managing something difficult with a composed face and was finding the composure increasingly technical. Haverford opened with what he had: the marital home, the joint accounts, a claim on the business's goodwill value generated during the marriage. He presented it with professional steadiness, but his voice had the particular quality of a man who has been told his position is strong and has begun to have private doubts about that assessment. Simone waited until he finished. Then she opened her folder. She addressed the business first. The LLC was established 14 months before the marriage. Raymond was the sole managing member. The client relationships had been built by the firm, under contracts naming the firm, with no participation or contribution from Claudette. Under North Carolina law, the business itself and its core equity were Raymond's separate property. There was no goodwill claim that would survive the actual ownership structure. Haverford's pen stopped. She moved to the forensic accounting report. The $47,200 in transfers from the joint account over 8 months. The $14,800 in direct wire transfers to Derek Paulson's LLC in the 6 weeks before the investor presentation. Total documented fraudulent transfer, $62,000. The civil complaint was already filed. The documentation was complete. She placed a third document on the table. 2 printed emails recovered through discovery, Claudette's work email, subpoenaed as part of the civil fraud complaint process. The first email, dated 4 months prior, was between Claudette and an address that resolved to Derek Paulson. In it, Claudette described the investor meeting, its date, the name of the capital groups involved, and the expected outcome. She wrote, in the language of someone who had been living in a plan for several months and was counting the days. Once they pull out, the firm's dead in the water. He won't have anything left to fight for. The second email was Claudette's response to Derek's question about the client list. It's all relationship-based. Once we approach them directly, they'll follow us. He's never understood that his clients work with him out of inertia, not loyalty. Simone placed the emails on the table without comment. She did not need to comment. The room was already very quiet. Ramon looked at Claudette across the table. She was looking at the emails. Her face had the look of someone reading words they wrote in a private confidence that was now public, permanent, and attached to her name in a legal proceeding. He did not say anything yet. He let the room be quiet. Then he said, "I want you to understand something." His voice was the same as it had been in the conference room on slide 14, even, specific, without heat. You had 9 years to ask me what I was building. You had 9 years to be curious about the work, about the firm, about where I thought it was going. You never asked. Not once. He paused. And you handed that information to a man who walked into my conference room and tried to use it to destroy something he didn't understand. in front of people who had just watched me build it in front of their eyes for 2 hours. He paused again. That is what you handed him, and that is what he did with it. Claudette looked at him. Her composure held, but something beneath it had changed shape. The clients didn't follow you, Raymond said. They called my office to report his calls. 2 of them sent letters. I have the letters. He looked at her for one more moment. You were wrong about what held those relationships together. You were wrong about me. He opened his portfolio. He slid 3 documents across the table: the firm's proposed settlement terms, the civil fraud resolution demand, and the marital asset division proposal. He slid them across, and he did not speak again. Haverford looked at the documents. He asked for a recess. Simone said certainly. Raymond stood and walked to the window and looked at the East Moorhead streetscape below. People moving in the morning light. A delivery truck double-parked. The ordinary business of a city proceeding on a Tuesday morning, indifferent to the specific reckoning happening on the 3rd floor. He was calm. He had been calm since the morning after the investor meeting, since the hotel room, since the legal pad and the first line of documentation. Not because it didn't matter, because it mattered enough to do right. They came back in 14 minutes. Haverford had the look of a man who had just had a private conversation he had not anticipated needing. The settlement terms Raymond had proposed were accepted with 2 modifications, both minor. Full repayment of the $62,000 in fraudulent transfers, to be drawn from Claudette's personal assets. A structured resolution of the civil complaint against Derek Paulson, separate from the divorce settlement, to proceed independently. The marital home would be listed. The proceeds would be split after legal costs per the negotiated formula. The firm, every contract, every relationship, every dollar of equity, remained entirely Raymond's. Simone shook his hand at the door. The emails were the pivot, she said. I know, Raymond said. She sent them on her work account. People who believe they're invisible stop being careful. He picked up his portfolio. Thank you, Simone. He rode the elevator down. He stood on East Moorhead in the Tuesday morning sun. He thought about slide 14, the contract portfolio, the $4.2 million, the building he had spent 8 years constructing. He walked to the Tahoe and drove back to the office. The civil complaint against Derek Paulson was resolved 6 weeks later, outside of court, with a payment of $62,000 and a signed acknowledgement that the funds had been improperly received. His attorney recommended the resolution when Simone's financial fraud colleague laid out the full evidentiary picture. Derek Paulson's resolution was, by his own attorney's private assessment, the better outcome available to him. His development project on the east side of Charlotte remained in limbo through the fall. The drainage and foundation engineering unresolved. The financing arrangement increasingly strained. A competitor development group made a quiet inquiry about the site in November. By December, the project had changed hands at a loss. Claudette returned to the marketing firm she had worked at for 6 years. The firm had not been formally told what had occurred, but offices carry information the way buildings carry load, silently, structurally, in ways that become legible only over time and only to people who are looking carefully. The managing partner, who had been her most consistent advocate, became occupied. The junior accounts she had relied on began to be handled by others. Nothing was said directly. Nothing needed to be. She showed up and did the work and said the right things, and the right things were received with the particular courtesy extended to someone whose story everyone already knows. Derek Paulson had told her, in the months when they were planning this together, that Raymond's clients would follow them. He had said it with a confidence she had mistaken for knowledge. He had said a great many things with that confidence. She understood now, sitting in her car outside the marketing firm on a Wednesday afternoon in October, looking at nothing in particular, that the confidence had been the product of a man who had decided he understood a situation without having looked at it carefully enough. He had looked at Raymond's scratched Tahoe and his legal pads and his Carhartt jacket, and had made a calculation that was wrong in every direction. She had made the same calculation. She had looked at the same things and arrived at the same wrong answer. The emails were the part she came back to, not the financial transfers, which she could construct a justification for in the right frame of mind. The emails? Her own words, in her own syntax, in a professional email account that she had written from the same desk she still sat at every day. Once they pull out, the firm's dead in the water. She had written that about a man who had spent 9 years building something real while she made assumptions about the ceiling of what he was capable of. She had been wrong about the ceiling. She had been wrong about everything above the floor. She moved into a condo in Noda. It was a good space, clean, well lit, a balcony facing south that caught the afternoon light. She had chosen it herself, for herself, and there was something true in that, even inside all of it. She did not call Raymond after the settlement signed. She had understood, at the table in Simone's conference room, that the last thing she owed him was the dignity of his time. The Meridian Capital investment closed in January. $11 million, structured as convertible debt with an equity option at year 4. Raymond signed the documents in his South End office, in the conference room with the gray-green walls and the shelving he had built himself, with Kofi and Priya at the table and the Charlotte skyline through the window behind him. Simone had reviewed the investment documents. Everything was in order. He called his mother from the parking structure afterward. She was 71 and still in the house in Accra where Raymond had grown up. And it was evening there, and she was sitting on the back veranda the way she sat every evening, with the sounds of the neighborhood coming over the wall and the light going orange in the trees at the end of the garden. "The investment closed," he said. "I know." A pause. "I could hear it in your voice before you said it." He sat in the Tahoe with the afternoon sun coming through the windshield. The yellow legal pad was on the passenger seat, already open to a fresh page, the first 3 lines of notes for the firm's next phase written in his small, precise hand, because he had started writing them before he made the call. That was who he was. He was already building the next thing. "Are you all right?" his mother asked. "I'm all right." A pause. Her pauses had always been specific, not absence, but the deliberate silence of a woman who thought carefully before she spoke and meant every word exactly. She never understood what she was looking at, his mother said. She saw a man who worked quietly and drove an old truck and came home and fixed things that needed fixing, and she decided she knew the whole picture. She stopped looking. Another pause. Some people mistake a man's stillness for the edge of what he is. They think because he doesn't perform, there is nothing left when the performance stops. She was quiet for a moment. "Your father was the same way." I asked him, the second time we met. I asked him what he was building. He told me, down to the detail, down to the 10-year plan. A pause. I married him 6 months later. Raymond looked at the building through the windshield. The 4th-floor windows where his office was. The conference room where, 9 months ago, a man had walked through a door expecting to find rubble and had found instead the cleanest 41-slide presentation he had ever interrupted. "She never asked," Raymond said. "No," his mother said. "She didn't." He told her to rest, and she told him to eat something. And they said goodbye in the way they always said goodbye, briefly, without ceremony, with the complete ease of two people who have never needed to decorate the fact that they love each other. He sat in the car for a moment after the call. He looked at the building. 17 people on the other side of those windows, engineers, project managers, a new associate starting Monday who was going to need a full orientation to the firm's documentation standards, which were specific and non-negotiable in Raymond's. The same way everything in that building was Raymond's. He had built those standards the same way he had built the shelving in the conference room and the gray-green paint on the walls. Carefully, specifically, with the understanding that the details are not decoration. The details are the structure. He thought about the 2-inch drift, the invisible column error he had caught by walking the site until he found it. He thought about what a 2-inch cumulative error does to a frame if you let it go. How the load distributes incorrectly, how the tolerance narrows, how a thing that was built to last begins, almost imperceptibly, to move. He had not let it move. He started the Tahoe. He drove back up to the 4th floor. He had 3 site calls this afternoon and a bid review with Kofi at 4. He parked and picked up the legal pad and walked back through the building entrance and up the stairs. He always took the stairs, and into the office where the work was waiting. He did not look back at the parking structure or at the city behind it, or at any of the things that had happened in the months between that Tuesday morning and this one. There was nothing behind him that required his attention. The work was ahead of him, and the work was real, and it was his. And it would still be his tomorrow morning at 4:53 when he woke up before the alarm and reached for the legal pad in the dark and began again. He always began again. That was the thing they had never understood about him. He had never once stopped. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.